Some friends that you want to invite, send them a link on LinkedIn and your local Slack. Whatever you use for internal communication, we got plenty of room for people to join. I want to welcome everyone, Derby City Agile Meetup. We really appreciate you all joining us. As you know, we're still gearing towards virtual meetups. Hopefully next month or maybe the month after, whatever it might be, we will reconvene in person, but most likely continue these virtual meetups as well. So if you don't mind, during the presentation, if you can just stay on mute, as well as any questions you have for Gene, if you'd like to put them in the chat, try to make them to the point as possible. We'll collect at the end and do a little Q&A. And I am with Smart Data. We're an IT services company, focus on custom software development and staff augmentation for enterprise companies, located in Louisville, Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus. So if you don't know me, connect on LinkedIn, have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to turn this over to Anna to introduce our speaker today. And I thank everyone for joining.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you. This is so exciting because we've now grown this to almost 800 people from all over the world. So we're very lucky that and honored that you all can join us. And for most of you, I don't know how many know, I actually work with Chet Hendrickson, who's one of the founding fathers of Agile and XP. I've sent numerous CSMs, CSPOs, and so I can get a lot of feedback on what people are having issues with, and a lot are having problems with scaling. And Chet has been talking about less for quite some time, so I connected with Jane. We had like an instant kind of connection in wanting companies to be truly agile. And so I asked him to be presenter, he agreed. So Gene Gendel, and he is one of only roughly about 50 certified enterprise coaches through the Scrum Alliance. He's a last certified trainer and coach. So in the world, he is literally top 100, 200 coaches in the world. So this is literally the best of breed. So we're very honored, and I'll let Gene take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Jay, for the show. I may kindly ask some folks, if you don't mind, just mute yourselves. I do have control to mute all, but I can't multitask, so I apologize. Do the needed if you may, so that we can have a clear recording and clear conversation here. Once again, thank you for the intro, Anna, and that actually saves me one page, which I'm horrible at. I don't know how to do a 30-second elevator pitch, I think you did the needed. The only thing I'm going to add is that my personal credo has always been, other than paid work, to invest a lot in communities such as yours, and I have a few on my own, and deliver knowledge and know-how pro bono, philanthropically. I truly believe in raising knowledge of masses of individuals in ways that other than just for today, and people really want to be exposed to this unsanitized information relatively easy. For better or worse, COVID has united many of us from different parts of the globe. Otherwise, who knows if I would be even speaking to a great community. In any case, I'm pretty transparent. I'm easy to find. LinkedIn, Yahoo, my site, meetups. I have a Slack channel, free Slack channel. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. So I'm going to kick off by saying my presentation. I was preparing myself for this presentation. I was I was contemplating with my own self, how should I structure it? Should I start off with what I think is the best way to scale, or maybe the word scale is not even the right word to start this conversation, or maybe to give you some unsanitized content, perhaps maybe it will lead you to those aha moments about some of the pitfalls and challenges we have with scaling, okay? So first, I'm going to make this pretty blunt statement. Agile transformations, quote unquote, is a pretty expensive endeavor, okay? Sometimes it costs you a pretty penny, especially if you do this in ways that is not fruitful and does not materialize in any tangible improvement. it's sad, right? It would be sad if you knew that you were invested into something that wasn't really paying back to you. So I have formulated this, I refer to it as a triple taxation problem that often client companies get. The triple taxation comes in the form of large consultancies that are often supported by recruiting firms, advising you of big bang, agile transformations. When you blow out of the sky your entire organization, when you do a very broad and shallow check marking that, hey, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, we meet these KPIs, we met these statuses and these maturity metrics, and off we go. Now we can wash our hands. It usually comes in combination with a very heavy framework installations, something that is very successful industrially, commercially, at least for some people, but very costly and not as efficient to those client companies that buy and install them. Of course, it comes typically, almost always, with agile tools, tools that have the word agile in them. It's almost like a triple expenditures, triple waste that you have to deal with. And I call it triple taxation because so much city, state, and government tax, right? So that's what usually client companies end up paying. Now, typically, one of the flags, one of the signs of this would be something like this. And I have coined this statement, although maybe someone wants to use it, by all means you can. Not to be confused with the test-driven development. That would be TDD. DDT stands for deck-driven transformations. And it's almost guaranteed. If you have a deck-driven transformation that is led off by a large consultancy with very thick, very expensive deck, the degree and quality of knowledge retention would be inversely proportional to what's in the deck. Okay. Again, may not be the most comfortable message to receive, but oftentimes if you're on the recipient's end of this, you would probably know what I'm referring to. Now, I don't really have to spend too much time discussing what good old Scrum is, right? Everyone, I'm assuming if we talk about scaling, then people understand what basic Scrum is, what Scrum that is performed by one team for one product owner out of one product backlog. We don't need to talk about customer centricity. We know it. We don't need to talk about stable, long-lived teams, cross-functional structure, component-centric team development. Cross-component centric team development, and of course, one shared PSPI, shippable product. Okay, now just assume that this is a right composition. Assume this is very healthy Scrum. And by the way, if you have a healthy Scrum by one team and you can get away with it, do not scale. The whole idea of scaling means you are trying to amplify something that is great at its core, but it's not sufficient in volume, and you just want to increase. You want to have more of it. Well, of course, if you can do it efficiently and actually amplify goodness, great. But if you don't have goodness underneath, you're going to be amplifying dysfunction. Now, here's an example. Even if you had healthy Scrum, good Scrum, and if you did this, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, it wouldn't be scaling. The most likely, maybe 10 or 12 teams doing their own independent Scrum on different products for different product owners out of different backlogs. And there is no need to call it scaling because it's not. Okay. Take a look at this one. This is really just two classic anti-patterns of Scrum. The first one here, kind of easy to see, right? You have analysis sprint, design sprint. Of course, it's a mini waterfall. Then a bunch of development sprints going on with the mini waterfall, and then you have testing sprint with a lot of fallout. Hilda, folks, I apologize. I'm going to be muting you, but I can only do so many things at once. So please keep yourself on mute. So this is a classic mini waterfall, right? So only in the end you get a PSPI. It's easy to see though, right? Here is the one that it's not so easy to see. It seems like you have multiple teams scrumming concurrently at the same time and the same cadence. Well, is it real Scrum? Probably not, because each team does their own component-centric work with tons of integration and bug fixing that is required at the tail end of it. So you still are going to be releasing very late in the game, only once. So this is really not, although at the surface it's harder to see because, hey, these guys are sprinting they go through sprint events, they are doing something. What do they deliver at the end of sprint? They deliver IOU. And these IOUs have to be stapled together later to get a PSPI. That is not Scrum. So this is fake Scrum, fake scaling. Now, moving on to this, moving on with this topic a little bit. So I am not going to pass my judgment. I'm going to pause for a second and let you form your own judgment. What are you looking at? Just guess, right? Maybe some of these buzzwords is going to give out what I'm illustrating here. Now, once upon a time, there was a great experiment performed by a small, lean music company. They wanted to improve its own internal dynamics. And it worked. It really worked. But then the blueprint has become a commodity, and everyone started copying and pasting it blindly without thinking what they're really copying and pasting. Chapters of chapters, guilds. I've heard tribes of tribes. It is really not a good way to scale or to transform to agility if you take an existing organizational structure, barely change anything about its internal dynamics, but just relabel the way roles and processes and tools are named, and then ship it back to your own company called Agile. Now check this out. If you take an existing organizational structure and flip it at 90 degrees on its side, without changing anything about its internal dynamics, reporting lines are the same, management relationships are the same, individual performance by chapter leads, mandatory participation is the same. It's not a community. It is not what was meant when the notion of a chapter was first made. It's not. Then you take very large geographical function specialist component group that is managed by usually leads or engagement managers, and relabel it into a squad. And then you shove this squad into the very large structure that used to be maybe like a portfolio with a portfolio manager. Now it's a tribe. And whoever used to be a portfolio manager now is a tribe lead. I mean, it's pretty much the same people on the different slogans and different labels. Of course, with this setup, with this sort of relabeling, you're not really changing much. So at a surface, it looks like, hey, we're scaling. But what you're really doing, you are changing your existing organizational composition into something that is, I mean, you're not changing it really. You're changing the way it's perceived. You're changing the facade. Systemically, organizationally, dynamics are remain the same. Now, this is probably my favorite, right? I call it the tombstone of scaling. Imagine you have healthy Scrum. Now, imagine it's overlaid by Agile managers, conductors, coordinators, orchestrators. You got a bunch of organizational silos like separate architecture department, DevOps, system engineers. It's all buried on the KPIs, regs, and metrics, right? And then you have, it's overran by cars, planes, ships, and trains. And, I guess it's overflown by streams and rivers and flows and oceans. And I'm a bit of facetious here. You probably get the gist of it, right? And finally, somewhere up there, you have customers. Now, imagine this. I would like to know where customer centricity is. I would like to know how long is my cycle time? How short is my feedback loop between me being a team member and my real customers? I mean, of course, this is just version 1. Where is organizational agility and adaptiveness with that? What really has changed since the moment we started this journey, right? What really has changed with this installation? Now, we all know that estimations go up from developers, from teams onto senior management and customers. Now, imagine how many layers of translation they go through as they pass through all these layers. Do you think you should be expecting any accuracy or reliability from those? Of course, prioritization goes backwards, right? How many translation layers does it have to go through for a developer actually to hear directly from a customer? These are my strategic business priorities. Now, of course, we're all born to scale, right? And some of these approaches, scaling approaches that are very successful in the marketplace, come with a certification, right? So imagine this: if everyone, their mother gets stamped at birth with XYZ certification, we pretty much have prepared ourselves, our entire ecosystem, our entire community, global community for scaling. Probably not. Probably not. Now, I actually had my own pleasure of having Dave Snowden speaking at my own meetup a few months back. He came back. He did it twice. He came back, and he made one interesting statement that I transcribed it, and it's almost verbatim, right? He explained the difference between the apprentice model and the industrial model. The apprentice model by some large consultancies is when you have a 1:5, 1:1 ratio between consultants that are engaged with client companies, generating revenue, and supporting staff that has to be fed, has to be supported, right? Up to 5 to 10 he calls it an apprentice model. When it passes that limit and goes to like 1:15, he refers to it as an industrial model. And you really need to feed your own consultancy. So think of it this way: if you're a client company, if you are engaged in this sort of relationship, you are feeding a large consultancy by allowing them to install these very large, very monumental scaling solutions on you. They obviously, they walk away with something. And by the way, also Dave mentioned something interesting that struck me. They're not really interested in seeing short, quick improvements, incremental improvements. Why? Because it kind of, a coach will always coach themselves out of the job whenever needed, right? When they feel that there's enough autonomy and sovereignty, they'll step back. But large consultancies do not operate that way. They are in there for good. If they dig in, they stay there. So this is just a way to think, just think about it, right? I don't want to anchor it too much, but think about it. Fractal scaling. So you got a bunch of teams, right? And each team has their own Scrum Master, which may or may not be okay, depending on the level of support that needs to be given. A Scrum Master may support one or multiple teams, at least in my experience. Now, each team has a TOO. You may ask, who is a TOO? What's a two? I'll explain in a second what two is. But check this out. With this fractal structure, and everyone, I'm sure you've seen it when you were children, or maybe some of you have children that play with a kaleidoscope. When you twist it, those images almost, they're fractal. They're symmetrical. This symmetrical organizational structure requires lots of mandatory coordination, and that's how you end up with Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrums. Now, the reason being is that because there's so much mandatory prescriptive coordination that's required between every team, because there's a fractal design. Each team has only one TOO and one SM. It is really not, I wouldn't call it scaling per se. I would call it, I'm not sure how to call it, because scaling and amplification to me are synonymous. Here, it's something that's linear. When it's linear, it's really not scaling. Scaling implies super linear, to me at least. And of course, when you have private backlogs, each team has their own private backlog and dedicated TOO. In a second, I'm going to explain who that person is. And a dedicated, everything. There was a lot of risk that there'll be local optimization. Each team is going to be locally optimized to do the best they can to work on something that it's only important for that team. It's usually a component. Usually we see component-centric development performed by each team. Now, the good question is, of course, who is a TOO? So TOO is this person who's really not empowered, who is not properly positioned organizationally to play the role of a product owner. However, because for the lack of better individual, better candidate, this person is thrown into the role. It is not a pleasant place to be in, because this person isn't really able to set priorities, to set strategic mission and vision. This person is primarily responsible for the output of that team. High velocity, more features, not necessarily important features, not outcome, but output. And typically these people come from, project management or business analysis or requirements engineering background. Not necessarily bad people, could be great people, but not the best people for the role. Where do I get these pretty slides? Of course, you may ask. I want to give a shout out back to the gentleman who put this together. I strongly recommend you to play this video on YouTube. When you get the slide deck, you'll have the link, unless you have watched it already. Okay. So this is really, in my view, it's weak scaling. So out of the previous few examples, this is probably closer to real scaling, but I don't consider this true scaling, because you're really not amplifying the output by multiple teams. Every team works in a silo. Every team has their own product owner, so-called product owner. Every team has their own backlog, and every team is mostly focused on components, not on features. Because if someone says, no, these are feature teams, then my question would become, well, if they have 6 different, or how many, 6 or 7 different teams in the same structure, each one having their own private backlog, then they're probably 6 or 7 private independent products. Then if so, this is really not scaling. This is just 6 or 7 different products, truly distinct products, and let's not call it scaling. It's perfectly fine to have legal contracts. In fact, if you engage with a third party, if you engage with the, with a delivery center or an organization or company that does development for you being a client, that's perfectly fine. Legal contracts are important, they are necessary, and of course, in order to write them right for adaptive, for agile work, we need to educate our vendor managers and our attorneys. This is probably the best way to ensure that your contracts are written in an agile friendly way, right? However, if we don't have this luxury, and if you have old traditional contracts written, then what happens typically when you have your organization wanting to become a more agile organization, and you want to scale, and now you realize 85 or 90% of your development is outsourced, you think it's not going to have impact.
I'm ready for lunch today.
Yeah,
Okay.
Morgan. All right. So that's what typically happens. You have a client company, and you got to have a bunch of vendors, typically competing vendors, if you know what I mean, right? Because each vendor wants to get the bigger chunk of the pie. So each vendor has, of course, an engagement lead, engaged directly with a client company. The actual doers that represent vendors are usually not visible. Majority of them are silent workers somewhere else, offshore, in a different time zone, and different geography. You don't know who they are. Now, these individuals are responsible for managing and providing estimates on behalf of their own people. Great, these are the best of the best. Now, there's a cloud, and they're so-called teams, which truly are not real teams. They're mostly groups of people stapled together, and these people are responsible for doing mundane, laborious work. And we sometimes see this being called scaling. We have scaled. We have built these out. We have built out these teams that are composed of these external vendors. We just staple them together, and of course, now we can check the box and we say we have scaled Scrum. Well, first of all, none of these teams is a real Scrum team. I mean, there's so many internal dysfunctions we can just easily write up, and we'll have a whole array, a whole checklist of things that they're not doing right as per Scrum. So if you scale something that is dysfunctional, if you scale dysfunctional Scrum, you're gonna have dysfunctional Scrum to the power of course, it will be very amplified. So then you may ask, what are the alternatives? Now, it is important to understand, and sometimes we don't stress this enough, organizational structure is the first order factor that defines system dynamics. Everything else that follows. Culture, mindset, behaviors, norms, that all comes. Tools, metrics, velocity, there's like the tertiary thing. It's there. We need to look at those perhaps, but this is not what you lead off with. This is what we often see less experienced people not stressing enough to see managers. So we end up trivializing what's super critical. Organizational design, organizational structure. According to Larman's laws of organizational behavior, And you can just jump to number 5, although I strongly believe that 1 through 3 are very, very important to understand. Culture follows structure. So concentrate on culture alone without paying attention to structure. It's like, I'm not sure what's the best analogy. You got something on your skin and you're trying to address the superficial, peripheral indicator of illness without actually taking care of the illness itself. You got some rash. Well, maybe you're allergic to something. Stop eating oranges. There's no point to start applying cream to it and continue doing the same thing you're doing. So this is your culture, and what you actually intaking as your internal structure. I actually plagiarized it from Craig Larman himself back in 2015 at the Scrum Alliance. He wrote a post there, and that's actually a snippet from there. I call it a sushi roll because it really alludes to the fact that in order to get the full flavor of a sushi, you need to cut across multiple layers, like seaweed, rice, cucumber, etc. So transforming the organization and just becoming more agile and just looking at R&D technology, it's an illusion. I mean, yeah, you may potentially improve some engineering practices, assuming that you get good developers, good technologists, properly train them. There's a whole gamut of problems you will face with that if you don't address, for instance, HR elements, right? But in a greater scheme of things, there are other organizational domains that you absolutely must touch for long-lasting, systemic, meaningful, continuous improvement. Legal practices, product management, HR policies, site strategies. We oftentimes see these organizational elements being left out. Now, the above mentioned Tombstone framework, in fact, someone goes on a record and says very distinctly, oh, we don't mess with organizational structure. It is too important for you guys, so we don't challenge it. So if you don't challenge the dysfunctional organizational structure as is, then how would you expect it to improve culture? Okay. So of course, Scrum again, basic Scrum, everyone knows it by now. If you look at the big picture and history of, well, let me rephrase that. There are certain things that came to market in a very reactive and very ambitious and fast-tracking way. Hey, we need to get here because there's a demand. It's great business. Companies asking, we have to give them something so they can unpack and install. Yes, it's probably a very lucrative business. Has been, at least for some years. And you can make a gazillion of dollars or euros, depending where you are. But there are other ways to think of this. For some people and for some individuals, for some groups, this has never been, the main intent was not to create a commercial successful unpack and install framework. The goal was to collect lots of experiments and experience over time, over a year. Something like this, and I'm not gonna say just yet what it is, has a track record of more than a decade of three books written, tons of research, principles, guides, 600 plus experiments have been documented. I mean, something like this that started way back when and has collected so much content, you can't really, we can't really dismiss it because history is there, right? I mean, unless we want to completely change the history. Now, if you want to read any of these books, of course, we recommend starting with the Green Book. I'm referring to large-scale Scrum, which is Scrum. Scrum. So before we go scaling, before we make things big and monolithic and heavy, think about how we can use something that's basic, something that's core and simple, something that's authentic. So something like Scrum. Now, large-scale Scrum isn't not many teams doing their own Scrum. Large-scale Scrum is 2 to 8 teams, and there's a reason why we're limited at 8. We'll discuss it separately. Scrumming together on the same product. So if you want to do an analogy, and I'm not the best person to create an analogy maybe, but if you have 6 horses running ad hoc, trying to compete with one another, with 6 jockeys giving different strategy, vision, and mission and different guidance, this is really not Scrum. This is not less. This might be. On the right-hand side, we got a bunch of horses pulling in the same direction together on the same cadence with the same strategy, mission, vision, same person providing cadence. I'm sorry, same person providing direction, strategy, mission, and vision. So that would be more analogous with large-scale Scrum. Or if you look at these 4 teams, scrumming together, start and finish at the same time, on the same cadence, having an opportunity to integrate continuously, not every 3-5 days, but maybe every 3-5 minutes, coordinate directly without any translation layers, being able to refine together, prioritize together, plan together, coordinate directly. Of course, it's all required. In order for this to work, you need them to be on the same feeding schedule, start and end at the same time. Then we might be getting closer where we want to be. This is more of scaling. This is more of scaling because now you got up to 5, here is an example of 5 teams pulling in the same direction, the same product, following guidance and prioritization coming from the same one person, not many people, not 2 people, not 3, not 5, one person. Obviously, if you read these bubbles, and you will have it later, you will probably hear a lot of coordination and direct communication between the teams. So this is probably much more of what we want. Much more of what we say, what we mean when we say scaling. Okay. If you have 6 people trying to lift one heavy car, being completely ad hoc, one is pulling in one direction, another person is pulling in another direction, someone else is pushing on it, someone else is lifting it. You think you're scaling the effort of one person into 6? No, you're not. In fact, these could be very antagonistic and very controversial and contradicting efforts. But if you have 6 people pulling in the same direction, that would be scaling with amplification. Now, what is large-scale Scrum really? Well, first of all, these things take months and years to succeed with. It is not unpack and install. It has 0 marketing, so the intent is not to promise, very lucrative and very successful result in a few weeks. It actually takes months to prepare and months, sometimes a few years to perfect. It is 70 plus minus people involved from development side. Simple. If you take Scrum, 3 to 9 people, and multiply it by 8 teams, as we recommend, the upper limit, it's roughly 72 people, plus minus. That's the max. Could be fewer. In my case studies, in my experiments, there were up to 5 teams, so there were fewer people. And we refer to this as a product, a less product group. Only one product owner, not multiple. No multiple BAs playing the role of a surrogate or a proxy, no such thing. Only one product backlog because there's only one product. No fractal approach, no local optimization, no component-centric backlogs, no component teams. In large-scale Scrum, the product owner is a key figure. And of course, you understand all these dotted lines. Communication is direct with high management, with customers and users, with teams. With super strong stress in large-scale Scrum, the importance of direct communication between customers and users on one hand, and development teams on the other. Okay? Also, very direct communication. No proxies, no conduits, no translation layers. How is it possible? How is it possible for one product owner to handle is not the best word, to support work of up to 8 teams? Well, that's how you define the role of a product owner. If you do it as per Scrum guide, as it is in Scrum, if this person is responsible for strategy, mission, vision, and prioritization, then it's rather simple. Prioritization flows as much as possible. Prioritization flows only through product owner onto teams. Clarification, on the other hand, as much as possible from users and customers into teams. And by doing so, we make the lives of product owners much more sane, because no one wants to work 2 jobs for the same paycheck, that's for sure. If you turn a product owner into administrative assistant or a Jira manager or administrative work of some sort of RAL or version 1 or VSTS, entering stories, becoming a secretary for teams, that completely that undermines the purpose and intent of having a product owner. That's not the role of a PO. So only through the product owner does prioritization flow. Scrum Master in less of course, I admire if your company has made an effort to improve its career path and HR database, actually entered a Scrum Master as the job. I know some companies that have done it, an amazing effort. But if you just run the SQL query, and I don't expect you to be technologists, like you can probably read this very simple code, very simple query, very simple code. If you just run the bad job overnight and update your HR database tables by substituting old roles into new roles based on a pay grade, that's a very unhealthy proposition. You know, just because someone has been at a certain pay grade and they used to be a senior project manager, now they're going to be a coach. Well, because why? Because they want to change their career, right? Larman's law number 4 used to be people that, you know, they've been around managing others. Now they can become coaches. Same thing goes for a Scrum Master. It's a very wrong perception that a Scrum Master is someone who's lower paid. As you will see in a second, unless it's completely the opposite. Or taking a business analyst and making them in a product owner just by relabeling without changing much on the HR side. In large-scale Scrum, a Scrum Master is a dedicated full-time role. Although focus may change over time as teams mature and as a product owner matures, this role does not go away. This person can support up to 3 teams. Could be 1 team, could be up to 3 teams. A very senior person, a very seasoned person, very knowledgeable person. Someone who has been around multiple Scrum and maybe even less adoptions. So this is not someone who looks at a Scrum Master role as just, hey, it's a night hobby or something I can do on a weekend. It's something that requires a lot of self-learning, self-study, and being mentored and becoming a mentee, being coached and becoming a coach. And that requires a lot of support organizationally, okay? So this is actually taken from the website, from the Authentic website. It is misunderstood by many that a Scrum Master is a place for leftover people to be. Oh, this person is kind of, you know, he's trying to do Agile stuff. Let's put him in the Scrum Master role without proper training, proper education. We'll just put him there. Many companies do that. There's nothing wrong with someone pursuing a career or becoming a Scrum Master, you know, a seasoned person. Becoming seasoned takes a while to get there. If a company properly supports this person, there's a much higher chance this person will grow, will become a good Scrum Master or team level coach. So that's why a career path for a Scrum Master is important. Okay. In the same channel, I wanted to say a few words about teams in large scale Scrum. These are not managed or, you know, or supervised people. In large scale Scrum, so in fact, what you're looking at the matrix of management versus types of activities that a team can do. So when a team is led by a manager, most likely they're going to be able to execute only tasks that are assigned to them, but not necessarily take ownership of their own destiny. Okay. Now, in large scale Scrum, we expect at least this level of maturity. When you have teams that are not only self-managed but also self-designed. And one of the things we go through when we take teams through the process of less adoption is we help them to self-organize and self-design. And at this juncture, at this level, they obviously can do many, many more things than just executing blindly assigned tasks. Okay? So the degree of individual professional maturity that is expected is pretty high. That's why one of the things that I mentioned before, trying to forget about scaling for a minute and large scale Scrum, which is Scrum. Let's think of basic Scrum. If you take a bunch of people that represent vendor companies, and these are not quality engineers, quality developers, people that cannot communicate with one another, people do not have the soft skill, are not able nor willing to talk directly to customers, the users, then you're going to have serious challenges with forming just a basic Scrum team. Basic Scrum team would be a challenge to form. Now, that's like level 1, right? Forming a scale organizational, scale Scrum environment will be even more challenging. Now, one thing that is important to understand, large-scale Scrum is not about scaling. And that's what I think it's a punchline and aha moment for many. Large-scale Scrum is about descaling. And we hear it a lot. What's descaling? When you descale the organization, when you remove unnecessary processes, unnecessary roles, when you simplify your structure, when you flatten it, just within that space alone where you want to adopt less, then you can scale agility, you can scale goodness. Until you do this, there will be too much interference, too much distraction, and proper scaling would be very, very challenging. I'm going to probably summarize this discussion by sharing one more slide to stress something that is very important in large-scale Scrum. We clearly delineate, and this kind of goes back to the previous examples of so-called scaling, when you have a bunch of component-centric teams, teams that work on components, stapled together, grouped together, and now called scaling, that they have scaled. There's a clear difference. There was a clear distinction between a component team and a feature team. You look at this diagram, and you can probably understand what I'm trying to say here. Imagine there is a product owner with a backlog with a bunch of items in it. You have 3 teams, A, B, and C. They are all component teams, work on individual components. UI, UX layer, maybe database, web services, maybe some sort of a business logic, something else. So each team can touch only one component. Together, it represents a system, or maybe it's a product. Now, Team C, at any point in time, can only touch item number 4. If I was a product owner, I would be very upset. I would be very confused. Why is this team working on something in the backlog that is so low in priority? And the answer is simple. That's the only thing they can work on. They're not qualified. They're not equipped with knowledge to do anything else but item number 4. And imagine the backlog had 100 items. And imagine component team D or E worked on something that was 30 items down. Would I be happy as a product owner? Probably not. But these guys, the team, would be very, very efficient in what they did. We refer to this as local optimization. They will be local optimized to do the best they can to hash out these components in volume. So-called stories, right? Or even backlog items. But who knows whether or not these would be used anytime soon. Now, needless to say, tons of integration and tons of fallout that would be following this, right? And guess what? When you need a lot of coordination between different teams, what do you ask for? Goes once, twice, three. You need a coordination manager. And imagine you have multiple lines like this. So you have multiple coordination managers. And these guys now become very local optimized too, because for them, once you introduce the role, it's almost like giving a lollipop to a kid. Once you give it to them, try to take it back. These managers will become very local optimized to look for more and more dependencies so they can justify their role. So you have a lot of local optimization at expense of system optimization. And the only way to see value in exposing it would be if you were like a sole proprietor and it was your company and you cared about its efficiency, or if you were like a venture capitalist and you invested in the company that was doing this, or if you were like a stockholder and you invested in the company and because of its success, your dividends or stock pricing fluctuated. So you really have to think from a standpoint of a buying customer or someone who has skins in the game to care about this. Now, the right-hand side is a feature team structure. Each one of these teams can touch any one of these components. So from my perspective as a product owner, at any point in time, only important backlog items are being put in WIP. That's a different ballgame. Now, each team is able to touch any of the components. So these are like independent military units, right? They all work on the same strategy, purpose, and mission for the same commander. However, they are autonomous, they are independent, and They're able to execute on demand. So that's a different ballgame now. So in large scale Scrum, which is Scrum, that's exactly what we ask for. And although here, my product owner can always understand what each team does and prioritize it, because most likely these are features. Here, my product owner is clueless. Why? Because these items are not true features. And from a standpoint of a product owner, this is a mumbo jumbo technical jargon, most likely. How could you expect a business person to prioritize these? This is how we end up with a TOOs. This is how we end up with technical BAs, talking to business BAs, talking to proxies, and lots of translation in between. So this requires, it is so simple to understand, yet somewhere more challenging to do. Why? Because you're cutting across organizational design boundaries and spheres of control and jurisdiction. Because each one of these component teams belongs to a component that has a manager, has a lead of some sort, and they will protect their turf to the death. So what do you do with that? Well, you go one level up, maybe two, and explain the dysfunction. Or if it doesn't work, go up a few layers and step over to the business side and explain to them the dysfunction and see what they say to that. Because here you are clearly, you are not, there's so many challenges that we see that we may potentially discover with feature-centric development, of course, but these are working problems. These are things that almost inevitable. So if you don't have a skill set, you have to hire a person. If you have, I don't know, if you can think of a few, but at least this is a more natural way to develop in the order of priority from a standpoint of a buying customer, from a standpoint of a business person. Okay, so feature team, we don't even use the word feature in large scale Scrum because it's assumed that in large scale Scrum we work on features. And by the way, this is because large scale Scrum is Scrum, and in Scrum, by the way, we deliver features. We do not deliver components. So I'm going to pause, and actually I'm going to stop at this juncture. I have some additional, supplementary slides that talk about different events that are very supportive of this kind of work, and there is very minimalistic add-on to what we need in basic Scrum. Yet those are very meaningful add-ons. Maybe it could be we may have it as a different conversation. So I guess my punchline and the wrap would be here. You have to be careful about what we call scaling. You have to be careful when you make a decision, oh, we have to scale, because 9 out of 10 times I've seen these decisions being based on bad intents, on wrong intents. Scaling for the sake of scaling, it's wrong. You only scale if you ran out of capacity. You don't have enough output that translates into a meaningful outcome. So if you have one team that is doing a great job and it's not enough, then you see how you can scale it. But scaling for the sake of scaling, that doesn't make sense. And of course, taking your existing org and reshuffling, relabeling things without changing much about internal dynamics and org design, and now calling it, we're using an Agile framework, that's an illusion of scaling. And of course, someone gets to pay for it. I'm going to stop, and I'm going to take any questions, folks, if any.
Yeah, so if you want to add any questions into the chat, that'd be great. I'd be interested to hear from anyone that is within this chat. That company does practice large scale scaling. Be really interesting. Right now, we don't have any questions in chat, so I'll give you a second to put them in. And I also want to give Steve Hackett from Harden IT a chance to sort of outro us here shortly. Guess with that being said, Gene, do you have a typical sort of question that usually arises around this presentation?
The typical question I get when I bring up this subject is this: what do we do when we're told we have to use XYZE framework? And when I try to probe, who said this? Who told you you have to use it? usually people cannot produce an answer. It typically comes in a very centralized, very mandatory, top-down, condescending way. That's the typical question again. What do we do? How do we change? I've more often than not, I've heard people being very frustrated with the way they operate and the way others at their respective organizations are what they consider as scaling. They're frustrated, they're unhappy, yet they're not empowered enough to change anything. That's the typical question I get, and my typical answer is this: you just have to talk to right people, and sometimes, in order to make meaningful influence, you need to take help from an external person who is not institutionalized and who is not worried and not concerned about delivering these hard messages to senior management. And budgeting people too, by the way. People that do budgets, they'll tell you what where money goes. Yeah. That's my way of answering this.
Okay, we got some questions coming in now. We'll try to rapid fire these here for the next 5 minutes or so. We got Wayne from Toronto. Wayne, thanks for joining. This question is, how many of these projects have you seen, or how many of the projects have you seen can be handled with less? Are there a lot of products that require more than 7 to 8 teams?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's important to say this: large-scale Scrum is, we refer to this as a deep and narrow as opposed to broad and shallow way of scaling Scrum, which means I wouldn't expect too many companies too fast, too soon to become less companies, or companies that practice less. Large-scale Scrum is most effective when you have a senior management buy-in and you have real customers, whether internal or internal users or external customers, that are really care about quality and quality of your products. And I like stealing a little bit from John Cotter's. He's got great quotes out there. You need to look for people that have a state of urgency. If people are in the state of complacency and they are just getting by and they don't feel responsible or accountable for monies they spend on these heavy installations, those are not the right people to speak with. Why is it so? Above 8 people, above 8 teams. So a much longer conversation to have how we expand and constrain product definitions in large-scale Scrum. There's something that's called less huge, which involves sometimes hundreds, maybe even 1,000 teams, individuals. And we actually have case studies about this too, authentic, written by people in the trenches. When you have a product that's that big, we spin off what's called a requirement area. So anywhere beyond 8 teams, maybe if you have 13, 14 teams required, assume that you may have different requirement areas, which will each have an area product owner, which is an interesting concept here, because we barely increase organizational structure by adding one more role. It's the overall product owner remains up here, and each product owner for a respective less product group is now called area product owner. A very minimalistic. Let me quickly come back to, well, if I have a few seconds, I'm just gonna, if you go to Les website and if you go to resources and the graphics, you will probably somewhere there, website graphics, you will be able to see, where's now less huge? Here's less huge, right? Well, maybe it's a black and white is not the best. That's fine. So each one of these boxes or sections is less. And here, you don't see, huh? PDF will do it. So APO stands for area product owner, area product owner, area product owner, who acts just like a product owner, a regular product owner to its respective product area, which is effectively less. So it's just stacks of less. Once people understand large scale Scrum, less huge becomes, a no-brainer. These are independent areas. It's like, it's a trading platform, and you trade toxic assets, exotic assets, like futures and commodities of South America. That could be one product area, one requirement area, versus fixed income and and real estate investment trusts in the United States. Very distinct, very different product owners. Will still roll up to someone who is a very strategic person, you know, a guy or gal here, a product owner. So it's a very simple structure. So
I think.
Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, going a little bit off of that, Jason. It's good to see you in here, Jason Harmon. So part of that transition from having one PO per team to one PO per product, which would encapsulate multiple teams. Have you been a part of that sort of transition or seen any challenges around that?
I've been a part of the process of re-educating people about what the role of a product owner is. That's for sure. Now, so in order, I think the question is fair. The fact that there is one so-called product owner is assigned to a team, it's an indication of, I guess, organizational inability to find the right person to be a real product owner. Because when we have a one person assigned per team, it is most likely the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest role to find, the easiest person to find, usually a BA or PM, and they're being deputized. Oh, now you're a product owner, but we know that this person is responsible for output, for velocity. These people cannot set strategic goals. Now, there's nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong with having one team per one product owner relationship. Now, it assumes that it's just a very small product and one team is enough. There is no need to have another team if one team can get things done. Now, if we have more than one team required, or maybe 2 or 3 or 5, then creating additional product owners will create silos, will create this TOO role, and that will require a lot of coordination. It just becomes unnecessary. It becomes an overburden. Yes, you can probably pull it off somehow, but at what cost? Right? It's all. Yeah.
We do have a couple more questions. We are running up on time here, so Gene is available on LinkedIn and multiple platforms. Sure, he'd love to connect with a lot of you. And
by all means, yeah. Let me fast forward. You can certainly look me up on LinkedIn. You can look me up. You can, if it's really pressing, you can just email me directly. I'm pretty.
Can I ask one quick question before you go?
Absolutely.
So let's say a company is invested in a scaling that isn't working. How long, maybe the Scrum team realizes it's not working. How long before leadership realizes it? Because I've always heard it's about 2 years before they, companies go to implement something and they realize it's broken.
Well, a couple of things, and you may not like my answer. First of all, if this approach has been introduced by a large consultancy, most likely no one's going to be admitting to that, because no one has ever been fired or removed from bringing in a large XYZ consultancy, because just it's reputation at stake, so people won't say it out loud. Most likely, it's not 2 years. I'm sure they see it and they sense it much sooner than that. The question whether or not they want to do anything about it. Okay. It's going back to what John Carter said, the state of urgency. If they have enough money and enough patience to deal with it, and for them it's just another project management Fed 101 or 102, then you may see 1 year, 2 years, who knows how long, and then we'll just kind of phase off. But if there's a state of urgency, if a company is doing Agile just to check the box, most likely that won't change much. But if the company is trying to become more adaptive, more agile, because if they don't, someone's going to eat their lunch, then they will care. So it's the state of urgency and the state of necessity. Do I really need to change anything systemically, or can I just get by and relabel things and just play in the sandbox?
Thank you. Well, we'll let Steve finish us off. Is that right? And then thank you, Gene, so much. I found this very informative.
My pleasure, and I'm happy to take any questions offline if you guys want to. And so I guess you are wrapping up, or are you going to take another discussion?
Steve,
I
you
think
can wrap us up, Steve.
We'll wrap us up, and sorry for going over a few minutes. And I'm going to drop a link into the chat here for Hardin County IT Professionals Meetup Group. We're just a little bit south of Louisville, and we appreciate the time, Gene. Excellent job. I'm from Jack Henry, as is Jason Harmon, who had a question before, and I think a few more of us on here. And we appreciate Derby City Agile letting us join up with you guys on this event. We deal with some of these same types of questions on a regular basis in terms of the optimal way to collaborate. So this is very insightful. But if anybody's interested in joining another local meetup group, we're hopefully very soon going to start meeting face-to-face and networking down here in the E-Town, Elizabethtown, Hardin County area. So invite you to join that and see when we've got events as well. But we do a lot of collaboration with Derby City Agile, fortunately, so we're one big happy family. But thanks again for everybody for joining. Thank you, Anna and Jay, for setting it up.
Aw, thank you. And I do have to give Jack Henry a shout out, because I always say they're my favorite Agile company, but it's true. They're my favorite.
Yeah, well, we appreciate the help that you've given us in the past, Anna, and look forward to more opportunities in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. We all appreciate it. Gene, Jay, Steve, everyone. So thank you, Mark. Thank you guys so much. Bye-bye. Oh, and all my students. I saw so many students on here, which is crazy. So thank you. Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you, folks. Cheers. Bye-bye. Been a pleasure.